If you've ever been left out by your own family, especially on a day that should have been filled with love and celebration, this story might speak to a part of you that's still healing. Please subscribe for more true to heart stories. And comment below, what's one moment that changed your sense of belonging forever? I turned 40 the same morning they fired me. A tea should have been a milestone, a reason for cake, awkward toasts, maybe even a little pride. Instead, I found a sealed envelope on my desk. No name. No note. Just wait. I opened it alone in my office blinds. Half drawn, the sun slanting in through the edges like it didn't quite have the courage to fully shine. Inside, one sentence changed everything. Effective immediately. Your employment with Evergrove Innovations is terminated. No explanation. No thanks. Just a signature. Gerald Whitmore, my stepfather, CEO. And Luke Whitmore, my younger half-brother, the company's rising star. The irony? It was the company my mother started. Evergrove Innovations had once been her dream, a modest landscaping firm with 2 trucks and a shed of borrowed tools. When she passed, Gerald married into the company, took it national, rebranded it in green and gold, and made sure the word David slowly faded from every plaque, every credit, every history page. But I stayed, through late nights and expansion phases, through bad press and boardroom wars. I stayed. Because it felt like holding on to her. Until that morning, I walked out without saying a word. Nobody stopped me, not even Luke, who was in the middle of a strategy alignment call in the corner office I once decorated for him when he got promoted. By noon, my parking pass had already been deactivated. By 2, the company email account was gone, and by PM, they were at the steakhouse, Gerald's 65th birthday dinner. I hadn't ARP, but I showed up anyway, not to make a scene, just to see. They had a private room at Langston's, the kind of place with candles that cost more than my weekly groceries now, through the frosted glass. I watched them raise glasses, toast, laugh. I watched Luke stand, do his charming arm wave thing. I watched Gerald clap him on the back. There was no chair for me. There hadn't been one for a long time. I just hadn't realized it. I ordered a scotch and sat alone at the terrace bar. The server, a young woman with tired eyes, asked, "Will anyone be joining you?" I smiled politely. "Not tonight." Around PM, I called her over again. "See that private room?" I said, nodding toward the frosted windows. "The Whitmore party," she nodded. "Big one. Fancy. Birth, yeah. I'd like to cover their entire tab. Quietly. Add a 25% gratuity. Tell them it's been taken care of when they ask." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "That'll be, I'm sure." It was the last money I had in my business account, not petty cash, all of it. I walked to my truck slowly, the cold creeping into my fingers. 40 years old. No job. No family. No backup. Just a little folded receipt in my wallet that said, "Paid." With gratitude, I don't remember crying. Not then. IT was quieter than that, more like a slow closing door. But when I got home that night, empty apartment, lights off, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down one sentence: build something no one can take from you. And somehow, I started, not with capital, not with revenge, but with remembering people who still believed in me, clients who only ever trusted me, not the company name, old friends who'd once said, "If you ever go out on your own." But those were just whispers back then, back when I was still sitting in the dark, still tasting birthday scotch on my tongue, still not sure if I had anything worth saving inside me. But sometimes all it takes is that one moment, that empty chair, that invisible birthday, that final push out the door, to realize you never needed to ask for permission to start again. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a safety net. What I had was a rented apartment that still smelled like the last tenants. Cologne and a rusting pickup with 2 missing hubcaps. But I also had something that couldn't be taken with a signature memory of how I used to walk project sites in the dead heat of July, clipboard in hand, catching errors others overlooked. Memory of how I used to sit across from clients, listening closer than anyone else did, because their homes weren't just landscaping projects to me, they were dreams made of soil and sweat. I had relationships, even if they were dusty now. And that was where I began. The first call I made was to Sheila, 10 years ago. Sheila ran operations at one of the most demanding commercial real estate firms in the Tri-County area. We hadn't spoken since her retirement party, where I gave a brief speech and a clumsy hug, but I remembered how she always said, "If you ever break free from that circus, you let me know." "You've got a spine most of them don't," she answered on the 3rd ring. "David," her voice was slower than I remembered, but still unmistakably hers. "Hi, Sheila. I know it's been a while." There was a pause. "Then you finally left them." I swallowed hard. "Not exactly. They left me." A longer pause this time. "Took them long enough to be stupid." We talked for an hour. Not about contracts or money, but about people who was still around, who'd retired, who might be looking for someone they could trust. She gave me 3 names. I wrote them down carefully on the back of an unpaid utility bill. The second call was harder. Jason, former crew supervisor. We'd had a falling out 5 years ago when he accused Luke of underpaying hourly workers on a government project. I'd tried to smooth things over, play mediator. In doing so, I lost his respect, but pride wasn't something I could afford anymore. He didn't answer. I left a message, heart thudding. "Hey, Jay. It's David. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but if you're still in the business, I could use a guy who doesn't miss a thing. I owe you an apology. Call me if you want." 3 hours later, he called back. His voice was stiff, cautious. "You working with the Whitmores?" "No, not anymore." Silence. "I got a couple of small contracts," he said. "Maintenance stuff. Nothing fancy. But I could use another pair of hands. Even if it's just temporary, I'll be there tomorrow." We didn't talk much on the first job. Just got our hands dirty. By the 2nd week, we were splitting gas. By the 3rd, he handed me a check from one of his new clients and said, "Put your name on it too. You earned it." Something shifted in me that day. Not because of the money, it wasn't much, but because I realized someone still saw value in what I could build. I registered a new LLC the following Monday, Redwood and Sons.no. I didn't have sons. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the name wasn't about blood. It was about growth. About planting something that could outlast storms and silence. Redwoods, I'd read once, only grow tall because their roots intertwine underground. No tree survives. Alone for a while, the jobs were simple retainer accounts, seasonal maintenance, a few design consultations. I used my apartment as an office, a borrowed pressure washer, and a tool trailer Jason still had from a failed partnership. Clients were skeptical at first. My name didn't carry weight without the Whitmore brand behind it, but I did. I carried it in the way I returned phone calls, the way I remembered the names of their kids, the way I showed up 10 minutes early and left their lawns better than. I found them. Slowly, things started to change. I got a referral from Sheila's contact, a residential developer looking for someone discreet and detail-oriented. Then another. By the end of the year, I had enough to rent a small office space behind a bakery on the east side. The smell of cinnamon rolls leaked through the walls every morning. It felt like a blessing. One day, I was sitting in the office. Invoices spread across my desk when a knock came at the door. It was Marlene, my old accountant. She stood there with a smile and a manila folder in hand. "Heard you're back from the dead," she said. "I didn't know I had a funeral. Not yet. But Gerald and Luke are trying their best to bury what's left of Evergrove." Words getting around, I blinked. "I haven't asked, I know. But others have." She handed me the folder. "Just thought you'd want to see what I've been tracking." No strings. Inside were 3 months of financial reports. Supplier complaints. Delays. Contract defaults. Luke had expanded too fast, taken on too much debt. Gerald was trying to hold things together, but his age was showing slower decisions. More panic. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. She smiled. "Because you didn't deserve what they did. And because this town is smaller than it looks. For a long time, I just stared at that folder. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to breathe, but there was a quiet part of me that whispered, if they buried you once, make sure they can't do it again." I spent the next few months building out the back end. Hired a web designer. Upgraded equipment. I made calls to old partners I'd once connected with at trade conferences, offering consulting services on the side. I wasn't just running a landscaping business anymore. I was building something wider, deeper, rooted, and for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night. One evening, I stopped by the old Whitmore headquarters, just drove past. The lights were dim. The sign was faded. A for lease notice fluttered in the corner window. 2 years ago, I'd have given anything to see it thriving. Now, I just felt stillness. Like watching an old house you once lived in, now belonging to someone else. The world hadn't ended. It had simply rearranged. My birthday came around again. I didn't tell anyone. Just drove up the coast, found a quiet diner, and ordered the same scotch I had that night 2 years before. The taste was the same, but everything else had changed. I thought about Luke, about Gerald, about the chairs they'd pulled away, thinking they could erase me, and I smiled, not with bitterness, just with the quiet joy of someone who knew that roots don't die when they're cut. They find new soil, sometimes, even richer than before. It was early spring when the letter arrived. No return address. Just a heavy envelope with crisp corners and my full name written in cursive, David James Everhart. Inside was an invitation. Embossed gold lettering, dark green seal. You are cordially invited to the 67th birthday celebration of Gerald Whitmore, to be held at Langston's private dining hall. Formal attire requested. Below, in smaller print, your presence would mean a great deal to the family. No signature. But I didn't need one. The handwriting belonged to my stepmother, Abigail. The kind of woman who always knew how to smile while twisting the knife. I set the card on the kitchen counter and stared at it. 2 years. 2 years since they cut me loose without warning. 2 years since I sat alone outside that same restaurant, watching through the glass like I didn't exist. Now they wanted me back? I didn't respond. Instead, I folded the invitation neatly and slid it into the drawer with my mother's old recipes: banana bread, Sunday stew, notes in the margins she made for me when I first moved out. Some silences are louder than words. Still, the day came. I woke up early, like I always did. Went to the nursery to check on a batch of flowering dogwoods we'd been cultivating for a hospital memorial garden. The sky was soft and gray, the kind of morning that held its breath. By noon, I was back at the office, reviewing numbers, approving estimates, drafting a proposal for a public park redesign. We were 5 full-time employees now, 2 part-time. I had a project manager, a social media consultant, even an intern from the local university. Redwood and Sons had grown from a whisper to something with roots, real ones, and yet, around PM, I found myself parked outside Langston's again. Same lot, same view, but this time, I wasn't there to watch. I was there with intention. I'd made a reservation weeks ago. Table for one. Outdoor terrace. I was wearing a navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and a quiet smile that came not from pride but from peace. The hostess didn't even blink as she led me to the same table I'd sat at 2 years ago. Would you like the usual? The server asked. Recognizing me immediately, I nodded. And bring a note with the check. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing through the glass. I could see the party in full swing. It was a mirror image of the past, Gerald at the head of the table, posture proud but face more weathered now. Luke beside him, laughing too loud. Abigail floating from guest to guest, all graceful control, but the energy was different this time, less celebration, more effort, like they were trying to prove something. I sipped my scotch slowly, letting it warm my chest. The terrace was quiet. Just the clink of cutlery, the hush of distant conversation. When my meal came a grilled sea bass with lemon and capers, I paused before eating. Closed my eyes. Let the moment settle. I'd made it back here, not to reclaim a seat, but to prove to myself I didn't need one anymore. When I finished, I waved the server over. You know the Whitmore party? He nodded. I'd like to pay for their entire bill, just like before, and include this note. I handed him a sealed envelope. On the front, in block print, it simply said, "To the family." The server hesitated. Are you sure, sir? That's, I'm sure. As he left, I stood and walked toward the lot. But something made me pause at the edge of the glass. I turned, just in time to see the moment they opened the envelope. Abigail read first. Her lips tightened. Then she passed it to Gerald. He squinted. Read. Then looked up sharply. His eyes scanned the restaurant, frantic now, and then he saw me through the glass. Our eyes locked, just like that first night, only this time, I didn't look away. He stood up. The room turned toward him. Luke followed his gaze, squinting, then froze. I nodded once. A silent greeting, a quiet knowing. Then I turned to leave. I had almost reached my truck when I heard the footsteps. David? I turned slowly. Gerald was rushing toward me, breath uneven, tie slightly askew. Behind him, Luke trailed, face flushed, mouth set in that defensive grin he always wore when he was cornered. You can't just walk away like this, Gerald said, voice rising. Not again. I tilted my head. I didn't walk away last time. You cut me out. That was a mistake, he said quickly. You have to believe me. Things have changed. I said nothing. Luke stepped forward. We need your help. The words came out sharper than he meant. I raised an eyebrow. Redwood and Sons, he said, eyes narrowing. It's you, isn't it? You've been poaching our clients, offering better rates, better service. What are you trying to do? David, sink us? I laughed quietly. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just doing my job. Gerald's face flushed. The investors are pulling out. Luke over-leveraged. We're losing contracts, staff, everything. That's unfortunate, I said, voice calm. But you said I wasn't needed, that the company needed fresh vision. You don't understand. Gerald said, the company, the equity, the silent buyout offers, they were all from you, weren't they? I didn't answer. The silence said enough. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. You bought us? Not you, I replied. The debts. the assets, the brand. I protected your legacy, Gerald. Just not for you. He stepped back like I'd struck him. But why? Luke muttered something I couldn't quite catch. I looked at them both. Two men who once had the power to unmake me with a stroke of a pen, and now? Now they stood in the parking lot, two shadows of the men who laughed behind frosted glass. You were right, I said. I wasn't family. Gerald opened his mouth, but I cut him off. I don't need to be. Then I walked away, not in anger, not in triumph, just forward, because some chairs, once taken away, should stay empty, especially when you've learned how to build your own table. I didn't sleep that night, not from unrest, but from something else. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes after a long storm has finally passed, and everything left standing is real. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the waves roll onto the shore behind my cottage. The sea had always been my quiet companion. Constant. Honest. It never tried to be something it wasn't. I thought about Gerald's face when he realized what I'd done. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, just because I'd finally realized I could, that I didn't need his validation. I didn't need a chair at his table, or a nod from Luke, or some half-hearted attempt at apology wrapped in desperation. I had built my own table. One that didn't wobble when things got difficult. One that had room for people who showed up. Without needing an invitation, that morning, I went to the office early. The front windows were still dark when I unlocked the door, but the air smelled like fresh wood and lavender oil. Our intern had started diffusing it to calm the clients. It worked. Jason arrived 10 minutes later, coffee in hand, baseball cap tilted back like always. You look like a man who just dropped a mountain off his back, he said, sitting across from me. I think I did, I said. He didn't ask questions. He never did. But after a pause, he added, they called me last week. The Whitmores. I looked up. Said they wanted to talk, reconciliation, whatever that means. I told them I wasn't interested. Thanks, he shrugged. Wasn't about loyalty. Just knew the difference between working with a leader and working with a title. We got to work. By noon, our project manager had closed another mid-size city contract. I spent the afternoon meeting with a veterans group about landscaping their memorial grounds. No red carpet. No cameras. Just handshakes and heartfelt plans drawn on notepads with coffee stains. That night, I found the old place again. The original Evergrove lot back when it was just a shed, a field, and a dream my mother had. The sign was still there, though faded and hanging crooked. I stood there for a long time, hands in my pockets, remembering the scent of cut grass and wet mulch, the way she'd pull her gloves off with her teeth when she got excited about a new design. It wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude, gratitude that I'd survived. Gratitude that I hadn't let what happened on my 40th birthday become the ending of my story. I took out my phone and sent a message to my attorney. Transfer of ownership is complete. Change the signage. Effective tomorrow, the property becomes part of Redwood and Sons Legacy Fund. Turn it into something that matters. The reply came back 10 minutes later. Confirmed. I went home. There were no balloons. No celebration, just a warm bowl of soup, my mother's handwriting on an old recipe card, and silence, but it was the kind of silence that held space, not pain. Later that week, I met with our growing team. I told them we were expanding again, taking on a new wing dedicated to community work. Free design services for veterans, single moms, and retired workers who still lived in the old neighborhoods. The room was quiet at first. Then someone started clapping. And it spread, not for me, but for something we all believed in. That weekend, I received a letter. Handwritten. No postage, someone had dropped it off at the front desk. David, I don't know where to start. We were wrong. I was wrong. Luke's in over his head. I'm not who I used to be. I thought building something meant controlling it. But you built something people actually believe in. I wish I could say I'm proud of you, but I know that wouldn't mean much now. Just know that I see it, and I'm sorry, Gerald. I read it twice, then I folded it, placed it in the drawer beside the first envelope, the one from my 40th birthday. The one that had ended everything. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because sometimes a door has to stay closed, not as punishment, but as protection, because healing doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes it means learning how to go forward. Even when the past knocks politely, that night I hosted a dinner. Not a gala. Just 10 people. Staff, friends, former clients who'd become family. We sat in my backyard under string lights, drank wine from mismatched glasses, and passed around old stories like they were sacred things. Jason raised a glass near the end to David, he said, and to the table he built, but I shook my head. No, I said. To all the hands that helped hold it steady, and for the first time in a very long time. I felt home. 1 year later, the invitation came again, same paper, same gold lettering, same familiar script. Join us in celebrating Gerald Whitmore's 68th birthday. Langston's private dining hall. Family and close friends only. There was no bitterness in me when I read it. No twist in my stomach. Just a quiet exhale, like finding an old scar that no longer hurts when you press it. I placed the invitation on my bookshelf, between 2 books I hadn't opened in years. I didn't RSVP, but I made a reservation. Same restaurant, same terrace table, same seat that had once felt like exile. This time, I arrived early not because I had anything to prove, but because I'd grown to love the stillness of that hour before the noise. The way the ocean met the rocks. The soft clatter of staff preparing for a night they wouldn't remember. Serving guests who wouldn't remember them. The hostess greeted me like I was an old friend. The waiter, a new one this time, offered a drink. Scotch, I said. Neat. I wore the same navy blazer, the same white shirt, the same small smile through the glass. I watched them trickle in. Gerald looked older, noticeably so. His posture had curved. His jawline had softened. But his voice still carried when he laughed, trying to command the room like he once did. Luke arrived late, phone in hand, face pale. I could read the tension even from a distance. Their world had grown quieter in the past year. Their name still carried weight, but no longer security. I'd made sure of that, but not through sabotage. Through substance. Redwood and Sons had quietly acquired 3 of their top contracts. Not out of spite. Just timing. Reputation. Relationships. We'd grown into something they could no longer ignore. As I picked at my meal, I spotted Luke stepping aside to take a call. His face tightened. He ran a hand through his hair. Something was wrong. Then, as if choreographed by the universe, Gerald stood up at the center of the room, trying to give one of his grand speeches. But midway through, a manager entered quietly, leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and slipped him a folder. Gerald opened it. He blinked, then again, and finally. He sat down, hard. He passed the folder to Luke. Luke's hands trembled as he read the front page, a formal acquisition document, the final piece of Evergrove's Holdings land IP. Client databases now officially belonged to Redwood and Sons. I had bought it all back, every acre of it, and I hadn't told a soul. The weight of realization moved through that room like a wave. I watched through the glass as the birthday gathering fell into confused whispers and darting glances. Gerald looked like he was searching the room for someone he couldn't find, until finally, his eyes landed on me. I didn't flinch. I lifted my glass, a simple nod. Then came the inevitable. The doors swung open. Gerald came first, followed by Luke, still clutching the folder. They crossed the terrace with urgency, their footsteps like thunder on the stone floor. "David," Gerald said, his voice already breaking. "Please," Luke added quickly, "this can't be real. There must be a way to undo this." I stood calmly. "There isn't," I said. "But why?" Gerald asked, his hands gesturing to the folder. "Why do this now? Why not come back? Fix it with us?" I held their gaze for a long, quiet moment. "You taught me something," I said. "You taught me what it feels like to be pushed aside. You showed me the value of silence, of being left out. You made me invisible, and that's exactly how I built something you never saw coming." Luke's face hardened. "So this was revenge?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Luke. If it were revenge, I'd have let you drown. But I kept the name alive. I preserved what mattered. I just didn't need your permission to do it." Gerald stepped closer. "Then help us. Please. We'll take your terms. Whatever you want." I smiled, not cruelly, but with the peace of someone no longer searching for approval. "You had my loyalty," I said. "You gave it away." Luke looked down. Gerald opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. I turned to leave, then paused. "You." "No," I added softly. 2 years ago, I sat here, and not one of you looked through that glass. Tonight, I came back, and you had no choice but to see me." I placed a sealed envelope on the table. "For the bill," I said to the waiter nearby, "and a 30% tip. They'll need to know someone still remembers how to treat people as." I walked to my truck. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed 3 times before I even turned the key. I let it ring. There would be voicemails, apologies probably, requests, maybe even tears, but none of it could unbuild the distance between what we were and who I'd become. And somewhere on the road home, wind in my windows, salt in the air, I realized I was no longer angry. I was free from the empty chair, free from the need to explain myself, free to keep building quietly, steadily with people who never needed to be convinced of my worth. Sometimes the greatest healing isn't about returning. It's about not needing to. And that night, with nothing but the stars above and miles of road ahead, I whispered something just for me. "Happy birthday, David. You came home."